Okay, so for those of you who are with us, we are going to transition into the flip side of the coin. So far we have been unpacking some of the challenges around giving feedback, what gets in the way, and then Lara just summarized a path for how to break through. And now we are going to shift gears and we're going to talk about, and Lara, I want to start out and hear from you. What do you see as some of the common challenges on the other end with receiving or really hearing and integrating feedback? What's your take on that?
Yes. So, normally, I mean, when we're outside of the heat of the moment, we can all say intellectually, oh, well, feedback is a gift. It's something to learn from. It's a source of growth. Yet, we can find ourselves reacting to feedback in counterproductive ways, despite that best intention. And so the most common challenges I find in other people, and I found in myself too, is the tendency to have these knee-jerk reactions to feedback that don't help us learn. Some version of dismissing it pretty quickly, getting defensive. That the defensiveness can happen and the dismissing can happen in our head or out loud, either way, where we're justifying that, well, no, I don't think they're right in that feedback. They don't understand me. Um, Another counterproductive knee-jerk reaction we can have in a moment of hearing feedback can be to jump to assumptions, making sense of what they're saying by assigning negative intent. Like, oh, this is retribution, or um, uh, just assuming that they're not skilled at giving feedback, they don't get it. So then what happens is we can shut down, and that can look like I'm just going to get through this conversation and try to look like I'm taking it in, but really I'm just surviving and I just want to get through it as fast as possible, but I'm not really taking it in. I'm not learning. I'm not curious anymore. And just hoping to get out of that conversation as soon as possible. And it can also look like a swirl of self-judgment, and a confusion between a swirl of confusion. Am I not getting it? Are they not getting it? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with them? And so, despite our best intention of taking feedback as a gift and learning from it and using it as a source of growth, we can find ourselves stuck in dismissing, defending, shutting down, swirling in self-judgment, none of which really helps us grow. And very much like what you were sharing, Tara, before, what we find underneath those common counterproductive knee-jerk reactions that pull us away from learning from feedback is that underneath that, what drives these knee-jerk reactions, despite our best intentions, because, we know better, right? We all know better than to be defensive. We all know better than to shut down or be defensive or be justifying, except we fall into that. Uh, and that is because, just like in the act of giving feedback and the act of receiving feedback, our ego fears get activated. We we've staked our self-worth in certain qualities, and if we perceive unconsciously that those are being questioned, that feels awful to our ego, so we have to protect. And so we jump into defending or just shutting down because it's too much. And so the thing is, I mean, I think hearing feedback can be the situation that can most activate that preoccupation with our self-worth, because we hear it as a referendum. Our ego hears it as an overall referendum on my worth and value. And so we hear it through the lens of, am I good enough? Am I valued? Am I seen as competent? Am I competent? We go from, oh, you could maybe work on this, to our ego hearing it as they think I'm incompetent. So what we'll call these ego drivers, meaning there are self-worth concerns that drive our behavior. They're like this lens that we bring to situations, that actually developed in our formative years when we were growing up. And I'm just filtering the feedback through that.
Hmm.
Um, and when that happens, I've completely lost. my intention of learning, and I'm just with a survival goal. How does my self-worth, how does my ego survive in this? Unconsciously, of course. So let me give you my example, because actually, the knee-jerk reaction of being defensive has been one of the major growth areas in my life that this work that we do has helped me with. So I'm a good example of what we're talking about. Um, I would be told a lot at home and at work that I was very defensive. In fact, I had a nickname, which was defense attorney. It played out with I was defensive anytime I was given feedback or anytime I perceived somebody around me was was getting feedback that I thought was unwarranted. So in going through our programs before, becoming a coach, I part of what I discovered about myself, because I went in going, okay, sounds like people think I'm defensive. I don't actually necessarily notice that myself. Like it's hard to catch your hand in the cookie jar. But because we do this work of unpacking, okay, what are these things we've staked our self-worth in, and where does that come from in the formative years of our life? I remembered a situation in my childhood where, when I was a young kid growing up in the early 70s, I got spanked for something I thought I actually did right, but it turns out I didn't. I was supposed to not talk about my mom being pregnant because she was in the first trimester with my little brother. And I was with some friends of my parents, and I was very proud of myself that I said, um, you cannot you cannot ask me about the secret that my mom has in her tummy. And I thought, oh, I was so proud of myself that I fended off the very thing that I was supposed to make sure I wasn't doing. But of course, I totally gave the the secret away unknowingly. And so I got a really intense spanking for that. And so in revisiting that event for myself, I um, just realized that the way I internalized it, because that's part of what we do in the seminar portion um, of our program, we look at, okay, what were some seminal moments in growing up that affected my sense of self-worth, or at least how I experienced it, it affected that. And so the way I internalized that event, other than the painful spanking itself, was, oh my God, I really have to do it right. Like really, really do it right. And I have to be irreproachable in always doing it right. Because even the moment where I thought I was doing it right, I did it wrong. And so what I noticed was that that has me sensitive to um, anytime I perceive I'm unfairly accused. Because in fact, that was my experience. Like I internalized, I got to do it right. And I also internalized this, first of all, this is totally unfair. Like initially, I didn't get it right. I just didn't get why I was being spanked. I thought I had done the exact right thing. So I both had oh my God, never be unfairly criticized again, because that's painful. Like unfairly criticized means spanking. And it was done a bit with like shame and whatnot. And then I better do it right. So in unpacking that in that in our work in our seminar, I discovered, right, I am sensitive to feedback, especially when I don't see it coming, especially when it's a surprise, especially when it's not something I've pre-articulated to myself. That's when I'm most um, you know, I'm most at risk of reacting defensively as a knee-jerk reaction. And so then what happens is I get defensive. I have to explain all the things that I did do right and all the reasons why I did it the way I did it with the right intent. Because, I spoke to my friend's parents with the right intent, right? So that's seared in my brain, and that's how our brain works. It's wired for survival. So it takes these events in our childhood and it interprets them as, okay, here's what I need to make sure I never do again. Here's what I need to watch out for when people are going to treat me that way. And that builds out our self-worth fears. So, of course, what that means is anytime somebody tries to give me feedback, hopefully I'm better now, but in the past, it would be a total waste of time because I was busy not hearing the feedback. I was busy defending. I didn't learn anything. The other person didn't feel heard. And I think over time, when we stay in our counterproductive behaviors around receiving feedback, people give up. They're like, why bother? Or they walk on eggshells so much that there's no clear feedback to hear. And I think it's a trust killer when we stay caught in these behaviors. So of course it has huge impact on our personal growth, our professional growth. Um, and and what I've discovered, what I discovered for myself and I've seen over and over again with the people we support is that the leverage in stepping out of these counterproductive reactions and hearing feedback is not in willpower. It's not in, okay, like the New Year's resolution of I'm just not going to be defensive because that doesn't last. It's exhausting. Like I can go into a situation thinking I'm not going to be defensive, but it's actually a defensive posture in of itself. Um, so the leverage is in recognizing what these deeper ego drivers are. Because once I realized, oh, I have a need to show up as irreproachable all the time, and I'm really sensitive to being to the perception that might be unfairly criticized. It's like the moment of recognizing it deflates the power of the ego driver in me. And now there's room for, wait, so how do I want to be in learning in this situation? So that's using my example a little bit just to name again, okay, awareness of counterproductive behaviors and hearing feedback, digging deeper, peeling the layers of the onion of what are the underlying fears that my self-worth has that it's projecting onto the situation, um, so that I can reconnect with a broader purpose as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so powerful, Laura, and I appreciate you bringing in the your own example and kind of the connection to childhood. I was having a pit in my stomach when you were describing the surprise nature of it. Oh God, it gets you. And I almost feel because you and I have some similar ego drivers, I can relate. And that's what I don't know if you feel this way too, but even now, because I have an unfairly criticized, unfairly accused ego driver too. And today, when I perceive feedback through that lens, I almost have that same physiological response that I did when I was a kid when I got in trouble, so and that's why I think willpower doesn't work. Like it's not sustainable to work through that automatic reaction through sheer force of will. It's more reframing the way we're internalizing those experiences that, wait, hold on, that same thing that happened then isn't actually happening now. Instead my coworker is trying to support me. So I don't know. I was just relating in a deep way and appreciate you sharing that vulnerably.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I think I have a much better alarm system now to
Right.
notice when the urge to defend is coming up, but then instead of just controlling it, I can be with, all right, that's my familiar
Hmm.
fear of being criticized unfairly. Oh, I know that. Okay. But because I know where it comes from and that it's not the whole reality, it's just a lens that I bring given my childhood experiences, I can see it for what it is, like, oh, it's not that this is necessarily happening right now. It's just my fear is activated. And whew,
Hmm.
then it can recede in the background and make space for, wait, what does the situation call for then from me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious then, of course, 360 feedback is part of our program and our process because it's so informative and illuminating to hear how others experience us, both in terms of our strengths, but also our areas for improvement. And so that is a part of most of our programs. And so people have this experience with us of being on the receiving end of feedback. And so I was wondering if we couldn't use our example or an example our experiences of supporting people to receive the 360 feedback to illustrate more broadly, how do we help people break through these kind of automatic reactions that get in the way of us hearing feedback with a learning mindset?
Totally. Yes. Um, right. So in most of our programs, when we work with leaders, we start out with a 360 feedback. So imagine we've interviewed, I don't know, 10 to 14 people in your work environment and also personal environment. We've compiled it into themes that emerge from these interviews. Um, but so, the compilation of 10 to 14 interviews, that's a lot of feedback. And so by the nature of the exercise, of course, it's a place where the fears that I can have in receiving feedback and the counterproductive behaviors I can fall into in hearing feedback as a participant going through this can get activated. And so we actually design this 360 in a way that we make an agreement with the person we're coaching through it that this is not just about, okay, let's see what there is to learn from this feedback, but let's also use it as a laboratory to notice when your typical negative knee-jerk reactions to feedback get activated. And let's use it as a laboratory so that when it's activated live, we can unpack together, oh, what's the ego driver underneath that just got activated? And this is why, by the way, we do our 360 feedback process the way we do it, which is that we don't send you a report, whatever it is, 40, 50-page report ahead of time and then, oh, let's make an action plan. Instead, what we do is you might have a 40 or 50-page report organized thematically, but within those themes, the verbatims that remain anonymous, but still the verbatim so that there's no uh, inaccurate judgment or conclusion about what is being said, but we have the actual data. We don't send it to you ahead, but instead we go through a series of coaching conversations where you, the participant, reads out loud the feedback, one theme at a time with your coach on a Zoom or phone call with you or in person. And so that as you're reading through the feedback, the agreement we've made with you ahead of time is anytime you start to sense that urge to defend, that urge to justify, we pause and we explore together, wait, what's getting activated in you? So that's part of the agreement we make up front. And the other agreement we make up front that I think really helps is back to, this idea of purpose. We we clarify before we start reading the feedback together, okay, what's your purpose in hearing this feedback? That is not about protecting your self-worth. Like, why does it matter to hear feedback? And what are the counterproductive behaviors you might fall into? And do we have an agreement to pause together when that's happening to you so that we can find the deeper drivers rather than spend time in the story of what's wrong with the feedback? So, what I'm remembering is somebody I coached not that long ago. We'll call her Linda. You and I have been changing names of people, so that they're not recognizable. So we'll call this person Linda. So we were in one of our 360 delivery coaching calls where we're talking through, reading through a portion of the feedback, a particular theme. And the comment that she read was, the comment read as the following: there's a disconnect between the feedback Linda thinks she's giving and how it's being received by her team. Her team members are not hearing the feedback she's giving, even though she thinks she's given it. This makes me wonder, the feedback provider says in their feedback, this makes me wonder if she's actually providing feedback and coaching to her team members. So she reads through that comment, Linda reads through that comment, and then starts to explain to me how inaccurate this piece of feedback is. She starts to say, well, clearly they don't know me. Whoever this person is giving the feedback, they don't know me, because in fact, I'm a very direct person. And to prove that, she adds, and my team tells me how much they appreciate my directness. So, okay, what's happening right now is that instead of her being in a moment of learning and curiosity, that could sound like, I'm not sure I relate to this, but I wonder why they're saying that. I wonder if there's something for me to learn from that. Or what could this mean? Instead, she was starting to defend and justify. So, because we made an agreement at the onset that I could pause her and interrupt the defensiveness to explore what was behind it, that's what we did. So the first question was, and this is something that each of you can apply to yourself or to someone you're supporting or mentoring. Hey, it was already just to observe that her demeanor had changed and her starting point had changed from before when she was reading the other portions of feedback. So it was something like, hey, I notice you're wanting to tell me why this feedback is wrong, rather than staying with curiosity and learning. Do you sense that your internal state has changed? And she was able to see, oh, okay, yeah. And so the first thing then is there a physiological sensation that changed here that is like a cue to help you see that maybe you're no longer in a learning mindset? Do you feel something changed physiologically or just in your state of being? And that's when she identified that, yeah, she was now with a sense of agitation and impatience in reading this portion of the feedback. And that was no longer learning and curiosity. So that's the moment where we can establish, okay, you're no, I'm the person Linda could recognize, I'm no longer in the learning mindset I wanted to be. I'm with a sense of agitation and impatience. That means my state of mind shifted. So that's then the point where we can ask, and I asked, okay, so what I noticed is, so we named the counterproductive behavior. There is a loss of curiosity and a loss of learning. Can you, now that you've noticed that, let's try to understand or look for what did your self-worth protection system take personally in this feedback? Is there a familiar self-worth concern that got activated for you? That is the lens through which you heard this piece of feedback. And what she put her finger on was, oh, you know what? I think I'm hearing it through the lens of the person saying, I'm not a person of integrity. I'm, and I'm not results focused. Like when they said, oh, I wonder if she's actually providing feedback and coaching to her team members, it was the word actually that was the moment of her, that physiological sensation, and that her ego read that through, oh, well, then they think I'm not a person of integrity and I'm not results focused. And for me, making sure I'm seen as a person of integrity and results focused is paramount to my ego. That I really, Linda staked her self-worth in being a person of integrity and being seen that way and results focused. So anything that might imply that she's not, she realized she was sensitive to. And we established that that sensitivity was not a new thing that just appeared in that moment. It was a familiar sensitivity. So the moment that she could see that that was a familiar fear, the fear of not being seen as a person of integrity or not being seen as results focused, because if her feedback, if her team wasn't getting her feedback, then it means she wasn't result focused. That was how her ego's mind had read the thing. So that was not new. Like it was not a new thing that appeared out of nowhere. It was a sensitivity she's had for a long time. And that realizing that was the moment that made space for her to see, oh, okay, yeah, I am justifying and I am defending, and that is counterproductive behavior. That is a counterproductive behavior because I'm defending this need to be seen as a person of integrity. So it deflated, like this is what we keep on noticing, and you and I keep on saying is there's the need to prove that I'm a person of integrity deflates when I notice it's something familiar. And so that was then when she was able to own for herself versus me telling her, wait, I'm just wasting time and energy right now
Mhm.
in building myself up and pushing, and building others down or pushing others down. Like, oh, they don't get me. What's wrong with them? And I'm good at giving feedback. What's right with me? And she then was able to put her finger on this is a counterproductive tendency I can have. So now she was back into a state of curiosity about the feedback. And so then we were able to go back to the actual content of the feedback itself to see, is there something to learn from that feedback now that we cleaned out how her ego had created a distraction for her. And she was then able to name for herself, I think this is applicable, this feedback they're giving me, when I see the person I'm giving feedback to as not a high potential person, as not a hypo. And if I'm giving them feedback and they're resisting it a little bit, then I'm just not going to go the extra mile to help them understand it. Like if I deemed the person was a hypo, I'd stay in it with them, I'd give them more examples, but when they're not a hypo, I give up more easily and I'm less intent on helping them understand. So I could see how then my message, my message doesn't get across to them as much as with others. And she was able to gain her learning. So, in summary, if I were to name the steps, it's one, noticing that I'm in a familiar counterproductive reaction and not indulging energy into that story of what's wrong with them, what's right with me, developing even a cue of a physiological sensation. For her, she couldn't place it in her body, but she could recognize impatience, which is familiar to her. Then, next step, so that's the awareness step. Then the next step is deeper awareness. Where did my ego get hooked here? What familiar self-worth threat got activated? That is the lens I'm hearing this feedback through, and that is distracting me from learning. Um, and oftentimes that's the point where that deflates when I recognize that's something familiar, that is a lens I'm bringing. And then clarify the broader purpose for myself of hearing this feedback. In this case, it's something we had done up front. That's how it works in our process. But for those of you who are maybe getting ready to walk into your performance review, you want to clarify, okay, wait, what's the broader purpose for me in receiving feedback? And here in this case, we clarified for her at the onset, why does she want to hear feedback, including hearing things that initially she may not agree with? And why would she want to stay in learning? And in Linda's case, she connected with, I really want to continue to grow professionally and I really want to improve as a person. So that's what created space for us to do all the other steps. But I think for all of you listening, that's something to clarify ahead of a conversation where you might be hearing feedback, or after a conversation where you heard feedback that you weren't expecting and you want to recenter back into a learning mindset.
Mhm. It's such a powerful example because it illustrates so clearly the cost, right? Like, had you and she not so intentional about this, like if we just think of like maybe your average performance review and maybe whoever it was, her boss, I guess, says there's a disconnect between the feedback she thinks she's giving, that initial sentence, and she went to the agitation and the impatience, that would have been it, right? She would have left the performance, or potentially would have been it. And she's in that story of, justifying or defending. And here, because you two together were able to notice it, identify and acknowledge what ego fear or ego driver was activated, and then come back to curiosity, she then got to the usefulness of the feedback. So it's such a compelling example because I don't think, in day-to-day life, when we hear feedback, we haven't sort of practice going through that process on our own, or we don't necessarily have the support to do that. So, and yet, if you develop that capacity, look what more you can learn. So it's a great example.
Exactly.
Great example.
Yeah. Well, so do you have any thoughts, Tara, on how our listeners could apply this in their day-to-day life, whether it's performance
Mhm.
or day-to-day feedback? Any way to summarize what we're saying in terms of what they could do walking out of listening to
Yeah.
us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be, you all have stuck with us. So I will be brief here, but I would think about, okay, so there are a couple like common spaces where feedback shows up. And one of those is around performance reviews, which, we're at the year, we're in the performance review season. So starting with that, whether we're on the giving end or the receiving end or both, I think our encouragement based on kind of these examples and we've talked through is the first thing I think you can do is going into a performance review, whether you're giving or receiving, take a minute and think about, okay, what in our language ego drivers are alive for me? Or in simpler terms, what fears and anxieties are at play for me as I go into this performance review? And if those kind of are activated, get loud, unconsciously try to start to run the show, how might that affect the way I show up in the performance review? On the giving end, will I start to sugarcoat or will I get overly direct so that they hear me? On the receiving end, will I start to shut down internally, even if I'm still, physically present there? So really try to anticipate for yourself what ego drivers are at play and how could that drive unhelpful reactions or behavior in the moment. Because I think if you do that reflection in advance, you're primed not to just go down the automatic reactive path, but instead to say, oh, wait, that thing's happening. So that preparatory work is actually really helpful for you to be in the performance review in a way that's going to end up being most helpful for you and the other person. And so I think the other part of the reflection you can do too is acknowledge the fears, acknowledge the behaviors that could drive, and then think about what matters more to you? Why do you care about giving direct, caring feedback and or receiving feedback from a place of curiosity? Is there a way that that's more important to you than whatever fears you're carrying into it? And try to put into your own words what that why is, what that purpose is, why this matters to you. And again, I think being connected to that why is going to help you recenter, much like in Laura's example, where she and Linda had kind of clarified a purpose, an intention, a why at the start of their feedback process. Then when you have that moment of a fear or anxiety or ego driver being triggered, you can go right back to, oh, wait, hold on. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling vulnerable. What's my why? And if you want to take it a step further, one of the things we talk about in our coaching and also our seminar work is to actually say that out loud in the conversation. So start your performance review, whether you're the one giving the feedback or receiving. You could have a moment at the onset of the call where you clarify, what's our intent? What's our purpose together in this conversation? So that's one application, hopefully that's pretty immediate given the time of year. But then, I think the other piece of this is, a lot of folks we work with and ourselves and our own organization included, we're really wanting to create more of a culture around this, where we're in relationships that can be fluid and transparent, and that where we're in a space of mutual support, where we can share observations both on strengths and opportunities, and both be giving that and hearing it from a place of, oh, yes, we can help each other the more honest and transparent we are. And so, I think, Laura, you and I have experienced this even in our own relationship. We partner a lot and we have a lot of mentoring conversations, partnership conversations, strategic planning conversations. And in those, of course, given just the frequency and the amount of, and the closeness we have, like, yeah, we accidentally, or and I think you would say the same, like there are different moments where maybe we get triggered. And, Laura, we've had moments where, as you shared earlier, I think you've fallen into your defensiveness. And I think because we've gone through these steps both individually and also together that we articulated above, we are able to use those moments as a place to practice. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think on your end, for you, it's like, okay, you're ongoingly able to work on the defensiveness pattern. And on my end, I'm able, or in those moments, I'm able to work on, can I support Laura with that from a clean place, or do I get reactive back, And so I think, the point I think with that is just in ongoing relationships outside of performance review structures, like the awareness of our ego drivers and the automatic counterproductive behaviors that we fall into allow us to then recognize those moments where they're happening, acknowledge them to ourselves, and then talk about them openly, and in our case, even sharing kind of like on both of our sides, some of the significant childhood events and some of the formative years that made receiving feedback, challenging for us. And so I think the ability to communicate around it neutralizes a bit the patterns that we might both respectively fall into. And I think what that means over time is then you're able to create relationships that are without those icky vibes, right? And so we're just not carrying the baggage that we might ordinarily in other relationships, and we don't have to dance around things because there's such a commitment to acknowledging our own ego drivers and communicating around them, and then also a shared commitment to a purpose of being mutually supportive. So all that to say, I think the kind of guidance and steps we've outlined both in giving feedback, but also receiving feedback are relevant just in everyday conversations too. And not just in the work context, but also in, partnerships or familial relationships as well. And so I think, well, anything you want to add? Because I spoke a little bit there, Laura, about our kind of.
Well, I just want to say how grateful I am to this conversation we had about a dynamic we could otherwise fall into when we had feedback for each other and using the tools together. What I'm grateful for is that my memory of it is that it helped us both be actually more clear on something we each wanted to work on versus feeling hurt by the other person's comment or feedback. And it ended up helping us like have an even closer and more trusting relationship by working through the feedback we had for each other and our initial, counterproductive reactions in that first conversation. So it was a great example for me of the kind of feedback culture we want to support all the organizations we work with, which is when you can artfully give and receive feedback, we became closer and we became more able to partner, and it was more fun to partner together.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's like, had we not had that moment and unpacked that moment together, I think we would have both, like, we understood each other better because we had that moment. And, and so there's also a missed opportunity. Like if we let these moments go by and instead we shut down or avoid or stay in our defensiveness, we also lose out on the opportunity to understand our teammates and our friends and family more deeply. So I think all of that to say, it wouldn't be a good coaching type conversation if we didn't leave you with a little bit of a call to action. So I think on your end, maybe as a takeaway here, do a little bit of reflection and think about, okay, let me consider some recent experiences of both giving and receiving a feedback that didn't feel good, and try to identify those moments. And if you can think of some, think about, okay, what did I notice happening? What patterns of behavior did I fall into, either on the receiving or giving side, that weren't necessarily productive in the moment? And if you're able to identify those behaviors, you can ask yourself the question, what was I trying to protect myself against? What fear or anxiety was alive just before I fell in that behavior? Because in effect, we don't fall into the behaviors for any other reason than because we're trying to protect or prove something at the level of our self-worth. So you might be able to do a little bit of a digging and understand, in our language, your ego drivers, and then clarify for yourself, why does feedback matter to you? I think it's naturally vulnerable and uncomfortable, but if we can clarify why it matters to us and the environment we want to create, you might find that that's even more important to you, even if it brings up those fears and anxieties in the moment. So that's a little bit of a call to action, so to speak, so that you can take what you've heard here and maybe apply it a little bit in your own life. And I also want to, I think Laura and I both feel that you are not alone in this. As you can see, we are with you both in our own lives. It's a journey. Try to put these practices into action, but also with LAL and in the work that we do, there are ways that we believe we can help and support you in this process. So, Laura, do you want to share a bit about how we can help?
Yes, because it's not actually obvious or easy to unearth what those deeper self-worth concerns are, because by definition, mostly they're unconscious. So I one of the things I love about our programs, and that's the invitation to any of you who thinks, oh, I could really improve how I give or receive feedback, is to, contact us because in our programs, not just through the 360 feedback portion of it, but through all the other portions, usually over the course of about a year. We start with a 360 and then we have two leadership retreats where we do this deeper dive with you to help you unearth, a map of all your self-worth drivers and actual ways to notice it in the moment when it's activated in you. So to know that map ahead of time and then to know how to use it in the moment when it's activated so that you can be like with me, uh-oh, I'm in this moment of my fear of not being liked. And we teach you tools to know how to unhook from that, to learn to connect with your deeper why, your deeper purpose, and to put, to put some practices in place so that you show up as your best self, responding rather than reacting. So that program, by the way, is called Ego Free Leadership. It's also the title of our book, Ego Free Leadership. And if you feel inspired by what we're saying, we would love to support you in this way so that you can learn to, whether it's with feedback or other situations that are tricky for you where you're reacting rather than responding, we can support you to work through that at the level of the deeper root cause versus the superficial, quick fix level that actually usually calls on willpower, and that's not sustainable, that's not sticky, that doesn't stand the test of stress or time. Um, and we support you with that individually. So you can look at it as a leadership development program for yourself that maybe your organization is willing to sponsor you in. But this is also something we do with teams. So we'll work with teams who come through some version of that program. And one of the aspects of what we do there is, in fact, towards the end of the program, once you've have a lot more self-awareness, you actually will give each other feedback with your team with the support of your coach, bringing all these tools to bear. And what's amazing each time we're in that exercise in our program is to see teams come to life with more trust and a melting of the icky vibes because they've learned to both give and hear the feedback in a productive way. So now there's no elephants left, swept under the rug. Everybody is in a more real, authentic, and therefore trusting relationship. So if that speaks to you, reach out to us because it it's really part of our mission to support teams to create more trust and authentic communication to create more of what you want, more of the results you want, but also more with a sense of joy and learning.
Very much so. Very much so. And so if you are interested in um, engaging with us further, there are several different ways you can do that. So first, if you're interested in learning more, probably the best place to start is our website, and that is learnaslead.com. That's learnaslead.com. So that has details about our methodology, program structures, testimonials. So definitely encourage you to start there. Also, if you're interested in connecting with us to learn more about our programs and maybe to speak to a coach about your individual or organizational needs, maybe this idea of creating more of a feedback culture feels aspirational, and like something that would benefit your org, but you don't necessarily know how to get there. Or maybe as you were listening, you really related to the idea of, gosh, I can get quite defensive when I'm hearing feedback and I want to understand that more deeply. So whether it's on the individual level or the organizational level, please don't be shy about reaching out and seeing if there's a way that we can help you. This work certainly gives our lives purpose, and so it would be a joy to understand your needs and to see if we can help out. The best way to do that is to go to the Contact Us spot on our website. So again, that's Learn as Lead. And if you fill out the Contact Us form, that'll come through and we'll be able to quickly get back in touch with you. And then finally, we love to dialogue on this topic of feedback and all adjacent and related topics. So please go ahead and engage with us in the comments section here. Like, share, repost, comment on our videos, and hopefully this is just the start of a dialogue. So all that to say, we want to hear from you more, and we'll leave it there for today, but we are deeply grateful for you all for being here, for caring about giving and receiving feedback in a way that's productive or constructive. Like the fact that you made it to the end of this speaks to your commitment to creating a feedback rich and caring environment. And so we appreciate your engagement, and we hope this is just the beginning.